Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for TWiT specials is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com. This is a TWiT special, number 43, John Perry Barlow. Hi, Leo Laporte with Tom Merritt, and our guest today is a truly amazing fellow, John Perry Barlow. You know, he often, whenever people mention John's name, they always say Grateful Dead lyricist, and I feel like that's so diminishing to who John is, really. Founder of the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He's an eloquent speaker. In fact, I think that's what he does most of the time. Former cattle rancher, but eloquent speaker on civil liberties in cyberspace.
Yeah, he's more than a cattle rancher and a lyricist, although he is both. We're going to talk to him about the electronic frontier and how the EFF got started and some of the issues it's dealing with.
Let's get John Perry Barlow on via Skype. So we're just going to do half an hour, 45 minutes, depending on how much time you have, talking about the EFF. One request I had from Jeff Jarvis is that you read a dramatic reading of the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace.
Well, I could probably
Can you whip that up somewhere?
I could look it up. I mean, I
had to look it up too. It's long. I don't know if you want to.
16 paragraphs.
I mean, to be honest, I find the rhetoric mildly embarrassing these days. It's a little grandiloquent.
How could you say that something that begins with "Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace."
Rest my case.
But this was 1996.
Yeah. No, I mean, all I can say is that if you're going to try to craft a political document that you think hundreds of thousands of people might read, it's best not to be imitating Thomas Jefferson.
He stands alone.
Well, and, Thomas Jefferson's prose would probably not be, widely accepted today.
And if Thomas Jefferson were writing today, he probably would write differently.
Yeah.
I suspect.
Yeah. John, you're known for so many things, including as a founding member of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Is that one of the things of which you are most...
Interviewers tell you stuff you already know.
Is that one of the things of which you are proudest?
I think it's probably the thing, I mean, outside of my kids, I would say it's the thing of which I am proudest by far. I mean, in terms of, making a better ancestor of myself, I don't think I've done anything else with my life so far that would approximate the value of that.
Really, the EFS, the Declaration of Independence really is, in some ways, a charter for the EFF, isn't it?
Well, actually, I wrote something that was actually genuinely a charter for the EFF that was somewhat less grandiloquently crafted. That in retrospect, I like better. But it certainly summed up a lot of what we were about, and still are. I mean, without reference to the rhetoric or somewhat overblown literary style, I don't think that there is much that is untrue about the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace in terms of a statement of how things are. I mean, it wasn't so much a statement of my intention or anybody's. It was simply intended to be descriptive of how things were and probably would be in terms of the ability of nation states to assert themselves effectively over the identities of this new environment.
You in effect say that the cyberspace is a sovereign nation state.
Well, or anti-sovereign, in essence.
You say this was 14 years ago, but I think it's still...
You have no sovereignty where we gather.
Yeah. We have no elected government, nor are we likely to have one. But you have no moral right to rule us, nor do you possess any methods of enforcement we have true reason to fear. You think this is still true?
I would say largely so, yeah. I mean, it's a continuing struggle.
I'll tell you what's still true. We did not invite you. You do not know us. No, nor do you know our world. It's kind of, it seems like 14, 15 years later, they maybe ought to know us a little better, but they don't.
No, it's true. Well, I mean, it's very difficult to know what you don't want to.
And they definitely did not want to know then, but now they're starting to stick their.
And frankly, I'm not sure that they're. I think if you were to take a private poll of the members of Congress, there'd be a pretty significant majority that would still rather not have anything to do with it.
Is that because they represent old entrenched interests?
No, I think it's culture. I mean, you become, to a very large extent, a creature of the environment that you are formed in, and I think most of them have been formed in different circumstances than would apply to most of the people that have spent a great deal of time engaging virtually.
On Twitter the other day, you posted, "I'm beginning to worry that the internet may be killing democracy."
I am actually quite worried about that.
So that's sort of the other side of the coin. Are things changing on the internet themselves?
Well, one of the things about having made a lot of bold predictions at some point in your life and then living long enough to find out whether or not they come true is that you have to reckon with that. And the weird case in my instance, and I've been thinking about trying to write something about this and taking a general inventory. There were a lot of things I said 20 years ago that actually have come true. But the way they actually feel is considerably less utopian than the way in which I expected they might. And I was accused of being a real utopian. I'm smarter than that, but I, for the life of me, couldn't see how much that was being manifested by the spread of cyberspace was going to be a bad thing. But it is a very gentle breeze that blows no ill, and especially if you have to take into consideration the complete renegotiation of all the existing power arrangements on the planet, some of which have been in existence for about 2,000 years. Some people will be unhappy, and when people are unhappy, they do things to other people that are not so favorable.
What are some of the things you think are threatening democracy from the internet?
Well, one of the things I thought, and I think this is true, and I think Wikipedia is working on proving it every day, was that it would be possible to know the truth about most things that the truth can be known about, thanks to the internet. Because, I mean, the way in which we understand reality and truth is by exposing a proposition to the maximum number of perceptions and then coming up with the consensus. And that's been going on. And I think, I don't personally, if I get into an argument in a bar with somebody about something and whip out my iPhone, I don't have reason to doubt the answers that I get because I know that they have been vetted, especially if they're in Wikipedia. But what I hadn't taken into consideration in making that claim about the future of the truth was that there are a lot of people that don't want to know the truth and, in fact, are perfectly happy to go around spreading intentional misinformation because it serves them better. I saw an Onion headline the other day that I thought was really, very pertinent to the moment, which was, "Local man hotly defends what he thinks is in the Constitution."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the bane of the internet that we found out, is that when everyone has access to publishing, everyone has access to all the information, whether it's good or bad.
That's right. And furthermore, there's no ethical system to restrain the so-called press, which is now basically everybody, from publishing things that are just wild poppycock.
Did you say that the truth is by consensus, or do you think that there's an a priori truth that exists outside of consensus?
I think there probably is one, but I would guess that it's not something that human beings are likely to know.
So we kind of approximate it with our
You know, I'm sort of with Plato on this.
Shadows on the wall.
Yes, exactly. I think we can see the shadows pretty clearly, but I don't really believe that we can see much of the thing itself. I mean, I think there is a thing itself, but you know, still much of what you see tells you more about what you're seeing it through than what actually is in some fundamental way. I mean, it's like Anais Nin said, more of reality lies behind your eyes than in front of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's so. But you know, to the extent that there is a reality that we can call real, it's the consensus. It's what we have the largest number possible has come up with as being the combination of our joint perceptions.
I'll tell you why I asked, because it seems there's a divergence. You know, it's almost we have stopped agreeing. There seems to be less of a consensus.
Well, there's a lot less consensus, but I mean, I think you're not seeing a new lack of consensus. You're just seeing the lack of consensus that was always there and didn't have an opportunity to express itself quite so boldly. I mean, you know, if you read de Tocqueville about America, you know, he makes much and frequently about our cultural willingness to argue about any damn thing.
We're tenditious, yeah.
That's
exactly. I mean, you said you approach these shores and your ears are immediately filled with the cacophony of disagreement.
And now, thanks to the internet, you don't even have to approach the shores. You can
just log on to a forum, any forum.
I'm just kind of astonished at the amount of, you know, especially conspiratorial crap that is widely passed around in, you know, explosively viral fashion online, and you know the number of people that would rather believe that than something plausible.
Is that a threat to democracy?
Yes, absolutely is.
Is it a worse threat to democracy now because of the ability to toss it around more? Because, like you say, it always existed.
I think no. I mean, it always existed, but I think it has found a powerful voice in the number of people who are willing to retweet it or pass it around among their friends. I mean, if they read it enough time, it becomes the truth.
So it's all Twitter's fault.
Well, it's a poor workman that blames his tools.
I'm perfectly happy to blame Twitter.
You know, I mean, the name says it all. You know?
I'll play the Pollyanna for a minute. Is it possible we're just working through access to all of this information and figuring out how to deal with this flood, and eventually we'll get to a point where we actually are much better at telling the bullshit from the good stuff?
Oh, I absolutely believe that. You know, I have a somewhat more chastened optimism than I did 20 years ago, but I am still in the main optimistic, and I would say that we are in an ugly phase. You know, sort of like the cultural equivalent to being 13 and a half years old. You know,
that's ugly.
For all of us when we were 13.
Good time, but
you know, Malcolm Gladwell wrote in the New Yorker a couple of weeks ago. He wrote an article which eventually Biz and Ev hotly denied, saying that Twitter can't be an engine for social change. It really can only be an engine to perpetuate the status quo.
Well, I think he was. You know, one of the problems is there's always the temptation to buy your own poster. Yeah. And Malcolm Gladwell has, you know, cornered himself in this position of being a naysayer. I actually didn't find much about that piece that I personally disagreed with, but there were a lot of flat statements that I would put all manner of footnotes to. Mm-hmm. I don't think that Twitter is a particularly useful revolutionary tool, just because I think revolution, and this is one of the points that he makes, and I think it's really an important one. Revolution requires persistence of intention and connection and conceptual integrity. It requires having an attention span.
Yeah, well, there you go.
And you know, and the attention span in Twitter makes television look like, you know, Talmudic scholarship. Yeah. I mean, if as I've said, as I tweeted, in fact, if if Jesus had tweeted the Sermon on the Mount, Christianity might have lasted all the way to nightfall.
But it would have been terser.
It would be briefly remembered, and I don't.
Lots of people inherit different stuff.
Yeah. But I mean, people. I'm not one of those people who thinks that the really insightful, wise things that people come up with, are something they come up with on their own. I think they're gifts, and every once in a while, I will hear something in my consciousness that is a gift from God knows where it comes from, that seems genuinely wise, and insightful and new. And I will tweet it, because usually, real, genuine, wise insight can be tweeted, because it has one of its characteristics is brevity. And, it goes out there and vanishes into the cloud within, maybe it gets retweeted 15 or it's not in anybody's mind. And it's almost as if I just feel like I do this. It's rather like prayer. I don't know whether anybody's listening or not. In a way, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's like a Zen koan.
Yeah.
You put it out and people nod, and you really can't have extended discourse on Twitter.
Right. No, you can't. And there are the other thing about democracy, and this is probably less, we're not just talking about democracy, but government. I think that government requires a kind of capacity to assimilate and process information, to turn data into information, which requires the intercession of the human mind to determine whether or not a datum is relevant or useful in any particular situation. And because of the internet and manifestations like Twitter, all of the functions of our existing governmental system are paralyzed and fibrillating. None of these things are working now. And they're working in this way that just vastly consumes resources, but doesn't actually get much done. And I guess, I could have seen that coming. If you say, all right, the existing institutions of the industrial period are going to collapse, well, it's not like they collapse one afternoon and by the next morning you've got the New Jerusalem already in place.
Right. It takes a little while.
It takes a while for them to collapse, and best that it does, because
yeah. we need food somewhere from somewhere.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. But right now you got this really ugly situation where they're all still occupying all the receptor sites of power.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
that's the disconnect, isn't it?
Yeah, and not actually in a position to exercise in any kind of useful or judicious fashion. And we, on the other hand, who saw this coming, have not been able to take the self-organizing systems that we probably can start developing and turn it into much of anything. The internet had a very fundamental role in getting Obama elected, but it has not been used in any useful way by Obama's administration in governing.
Why is that?
Well, because nobody knows quite how to do it yet. These are early days. We're trying to figure it out.
Are we
and moreover, there is this amazingly heavy concentration of inertial things as they have been thing that sits inside the beltway that really does not like change.
Yeah,
government and some industries are actually finally feeling the threat of what the internet can do, and they're sort of reacting back instead of trying to figure out how to participate.
That's right.
Well, and I wonder, are we as denizens of cyberspace destined to sit here and fiddle while Rome burns, or is there something we can do to?
No, I think the first order of business usually with creating solutions is just going forth and trying to attack problems with whatever tools you have available. I think we can be a lot better than we have been so far at taking what's available to us and not assuming the government's going to get anything done, but going out and doing it on our own and assembling the forces that we have available to us by the means available to us to get it done.
We had Tim O'Reilly on here a month or so ago talking about Government 2.0. Government is a platform to be developed upon. Would you keep the platform, or would you tear it down and start with a new scaffold? I'm sorry, platform.
Well, you've got the DOS problem, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to start.
I don't know whether, I don't use Windows.
Do we go Microsoft or Apple in our approach, right?
Apple's pretty Sovietic. I'm not sure that's the way to go either. But you can only have backward compatibility just to a certain extent before you have a system that doesn't work, as Microsoft proves every time they have a software release.
Which is why they started over with Windows Phone 7, because they were getting their ass handed to them.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and I think that they probably are about to again, just because they also don't know how to design environments where you'd want to have your mind.
Who gets Microsoft gets to say we're going to start over? Apple gets to say we're going to start over with OS 10. Who gets to say we start over with government, though?
That sounds like
usually a large
revolution.
number of people with guns.
Yeah,
do that.
that sounds like revolution.
And that's usually not a happy outcome.
Yeah.
I can't think of a single instance where a sudden armed revolution produced a government that was significantly more humane than the one that they overthrew.
U.S. revolution?
Well, that wasn't a revolution in the same sense. I know we refer to it as that, but it was more like an insurrection against an occupying power.
Yeah. Change of elites.
The people of the United States, or what became the United States, had been here for a couple of centuries before they decided to get rid of Mad King George. And he was an awful long ways away. And, it wasn't the same thing that happened in the Soviet Union. It wasn't the same thing that happened in Cuba or China or any number of places.
It wasn't the storming of the Bastille.
Right, exactly. It wasn't France where, that's actually the right comparison. If you compare the American Revolution, the French Revolution, which purported to be inspired by it, and, as ours was to a large extent inspired by French writing, they're very, very different in their outcomes.
Yeah, we didn't end up with a Napoleon, at least right away.
Well, or a reign of terror.
Right. No guillotines.
No.
You started the EFF, according to the Wikipedia, which you've just said is accurate.
It's accurate in terms of the facts. It's not necessarily accurate in terms of the emphasis. I have a general moral opposition to editing my own Wikipedia entry.
Well, I'll run it by you. You tell me. It says, in April, you were visited by the FBI in relation to the theft and distribution of source code for a series of Macintosh ROMs. You described the visit as, quote, complicated by the agent's fairly complete unfamiliarity with computer technology. I realized right away that before I could demonstrate my innocence, I would first have to explain to him what guilt might be.
Yes, that's true. And I spent a couple of hours trying to explain that to him. He didn't know a ROM chip from a cow chip. And he just kept sort of putting his face in his hands and saying, whoa.
Whoa, this is too much. Whoa, you're blowing my mind, man. So you put that up on the Well. You were an early member of the Well. And apparently, according to Wikipedia, Mitch Kapor contacted you. He'd had a similar experience.
Yes, he had. He'd also had a visit from the FBI that he'd not even told his wife about because it had been so disorienting and troubling. Because Mitch is the kind of guy that tends to think that government works. I was raised in Wyoming where it was sort of a priori that it didn't, but...
we knew it didn't work.
And I'm a libertarian and Mitch is a liberal. And there's
right.
And so he was thinking, God, that was just like the most surreal experience of my life. And but then he read this thing that I'd put on the Well and realized that, that was part of the same thing. And suddenly he had a support group.
Yeah.
Mitch and I knew each other. I'd interviewed him for Microtimes, and we'd taken quite a liking to each other. And in fact, it said at one point, I don't know what it's going to be, but I'll bet we do something together sooner or later.
And EFF was born.
And, and Mitch, this was actually quite dramatic. Mitch called me up from the air somewhere over, Nebraska. He was flying in his biz jet to California and asked if I thought it was possible to land a Canadair Challenger at Pinedale Airport. And I said, well, yes, I knew that it was because I'd seen them there. And because there are a lot of fat cats that have bought ranches.
Right.
And you know, he literally kind of dropped out of the sky, and we spent the afternoon looking at the evidence that I'd amassed at that point with Steve Jackson Games case and then Operation Sun Devil and Legion of Doom cases and FRAC and whatnot. And by the time we had a chance to talk about it, we decided to call up a civil liberties law firm in New York who had done the Pentagon Papers and see what they thought about it. I mean, at that point, I had already called the ACLU, and interestingly enough, got our first executive director, Jerry Berman, who gave me such a brush off, I can't tell you. He said, we don't do that sort of thing. We don't know anything about that. We don't actually, frankly, want to know anything about that. But after Mitch was in the picture, then suddenly Jerry was quite a bit more interested in talking about it.
Wozniak put some money in. Sun founder John Gilmore came aboard.
Yep.
And
Gilmore wrote me this priceless email. I didn't know Gilmore very well. I'd met him once. And Mitch and I'd made some press about EFF and about our, rising up to deal with some of these cases. And Gilmore said, well, he wrote me an email which consisted entirely, I don't know that I have Mitch's resources to bring to bear on this, but would $100,000 help?
Great.
Wrote back, yes.
Indeed it would. So the one thing about EFF that's kind of different than, say, Epic or some of the other groups that fight for civil liberties online is you litigate. Yeah, we do. You go to court.
Yeah, though, what's not so well known is I think an awful lot of the work we do that's valuable is in a layer of the stack that is much closer to the machine. I mean, because, litigation, the force of litigation is local. You can do useful things within a local jurisdiction, like, say, the United States of America, but, ultimately, the power of the United States of America over the internet is somewhat limited. Mm-hmm. And, the real power lies in the architecture. As Mitch famously said, architecture is politics, and that's true in this case. There are plenty of ways in which you can alter the architecture that would change the political environment in an adverse way. So we've got some really smart geeks that are constantly looking at what's going on in the standard setting arena.
Interesting.
And quietly or invisibly to the general public, doing things to keep closed architecture from infecting the way in which the net operates.
How much of a threat is all of this talk about net neutrality to how the internet works, specifically thinking about what you're saying about standard setting and just having the architecture be the thing that keeps the internet working the way it should?
Well, Leo knows my ambivalence on this, having attended a gathering.
That was, by the way, a great gathering.
It was a good discussion, I thought.
Oh, but, amazing. Yeah.
Ultimately, we ran up against the same things that I do whenever I think about it, which is that, I don't think there are very many people, well, there probably are, but I don't take them seriously. I don't think there are very many people that don't want the internet to be open. I think that even
with the exception of Rupert Murdoch.
Well,
maybe even him.
Rupert Murdoch, I think, if he really thought that he could get the job done, I think he might be less inclined to try.
Oh, interesting.
I think what he's trying to do is put up speed bumps that will last as long as he does.
Yes, you're right.
And after him, the deluge.
But I think that's what Cory Doctorow once told me, that he said, really, the record industries are just trying to say, not on my watch. We know it's going to happen.
Yeah. That's absolutely correct. And they have told me as much.
Yeah. Just as long as it doesn't happen while we're sitting in the big
We don't want to get the blame for it. Yeah.
I want to go on making payments on my Porsche, but after I've transferred to a wheelchair, you can do whatever you want.
They recognize the inevitability, then, I guess.
Yeah, they do. The smart ones do.
Yeah.
And then some of them have a religious view that makes it impossible for that to be recognizable. But the thing is that everybody wants the net to go on being the miracle it has been to the extent possible. what you argue about is how to arrive at that. And personally, I have a lot of misgivings about trying to have the FCC or any regulatory portion of the United States government putting up regulations that are going to somehow define the way in which the network operates. Because again, our authority is local, and furthermore, there's no reason to believe that we have our metaphors right yet. You know, I mean, the FCC is still dealing with bandwidth as though it were real estate, when it's absolutely nothing like real estate.
Or
I mean,
airwaves.
it was a little like real estate when radios had crystal sets, you know. But, you know, Hedy Lamarr fixed that.
Yeah, right. Thanks to spread spectrum.
Right, exactly.
So
back in spread spectrum,
but if not the government,
well, I think I have a lot of faith in the ability of the market to do good things in this regard. But is there a free market in this? And the way in which this is not a free market. That's my point. And the way the useful way I think the government could get involved is come in and start trust busting the duopoly system that applies almost everywhere with regard to bandwidth.
The duopoly they created.
Well, it was a duopoly that was created by a weird set of pre-existing conditions. I mean, you had telcos, which were basically regulated nationally by the, you know, as part of the Bell system had been by the FCC. And you had these cable companies, which were local, you know, and were regulated by the whatever municipality they were in. So you had these two completely different regulatory regimes that suddenly came together. And now, you know, most of the time, if I want to get an internet connection someplace and I don't want to pay an absurd amount of money, I've got my choice between the cable provider and the telco. And that's it.
So what does that trust busting look like?
Well, that looks like, you know, genuinely creating a circumstance where, you know, as you see in a lot of Europe, where there can be competition in the local loop, and also in the wireless environment, where they have to share resources, and where, you know, I think you come in and do genuine antitrust action, you know, where you have monopolistic concentrations of economic power that are so great that they're not possible to compete with.
So the government sets a few rules about what you can't do and then hands off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because even staunch libertarians, it's the one government regulation everybody seems to agree works is trust busting.
Yeah.
Because
and you know, not only that, it's just who else is going to do it?
Right.
I mean, you can kind of do it in the marketplace, but in such a ham-handed fashion that it's almost not worth trying.
So I think I agree with you. This is a kind of nice way to split the baby, which is if you create a true market, then you don't have to regulate the internet. You let
That's right. And that was, you know, back in the day, you know, people would talk about the getting into a situation where there would be too much control over one channel or another of internet access. And I said, I don't think that's going to happen because, you know, there are just so many ways to get a bit around. Well, it turns out that there are not many ubiquitous ways to get a bit around.
Right.
And by circumstance of the development of bandwidth provision in this country, they have fallen down to just two in most cases.
One of the arguments against net neutrality government regulation is that, well, you're making a regulation against something that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and I that's an argument that I've made. But, you know, and I feel the same way about, you know, arresting people for pre-crime.
Right.
Pre-crime.
Yeah, right. Minority Report.
Right. But you can certainly see the beginnings of it happening, and you can also see the motivations for it, and some of those motivations are not bad. I mean, if AT&T were able to do some modicum of bandwidth shaping, it would be possible to get on Safari in San Francisco with your iPhone.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, really.
Exactly. Well, that's where I stand too. Is that, you know, trying to tell the industry how it should best manage its network is not the way to get net neutrality.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think you really have to be able to let them sort some of that stuff out. And, you know, I think one of the things that we need to do in this country and most places is to quit talking about the how of something and start talking more about the what. You know, and saying, all right, this is the end result that we want. We don't care how you get it.
You disagree with the FCC's national broadband plan?
You know, a little bit, because I was on the Wyoming Telecommunications Commission for a while. And at that point, you know, because Wyoming is vast. It's, you know, it's the size of Germany, and it's got about 500,000 people in it. And I was really thinking that the state of Wyoming needed to come in, you know, enter the market in a proactive way, and use their already existing bandwidth that they'd set up for law enforcement and several other things to provide high-speed connection to local areas. And, you know, I did not prevail in that argument, and it turns out to be a good thing that I didn't, because the competition actually took care of it quite nicely and in a way that was much more ultimately advanced. I mean, it turned out that people really did go for it.
Boy, I wish I could have the same kind of sanguine attitude about, I mean, we have the highest cost and the slowest internet, or among the highest cost and slowest internet in the world.
And one of the things you see when you look at why, a lot of studies have showed it's because we haven't busted the trust, because we have a duopoly. If you open up the lines and say it's open marketplace, that you end up having that competition create that sort of speed and that sort of reliability.
Well, there is another argument that can be made, that, you know, and I always thought the information superhighway was a ludicrous thing. I mean, and it was derived mostly by the fact that Al Gore's father did a lot of the
highway system,
highway system. But the highway system has been an enormous driver for a lot of economic growth in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it sort of killed the railroads, but because nobody went out and had a national strategic railroad system. But I think that in the countries where you really see good bandwidth generally distributed, it is true that the government has done an awful lot of the long line provision, which this government could do. And I'm, you know, even though I would be a little bit wary of it from a political, my ordinarily ideological standpoint on this, I think that maybe that's something that we need to do.
It seems that at least the backbone should be agnostic, should be independent.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
Is that the government seizing property in some way, though? Is that too much interference?
Well, I don't know. I don't think it's a matter of, I mean, first of all, the internet is not a vertebrate. It's got more than one backbone. And it can have, preferably would have a lot more than one backbone. That's, that was the whole idea of the architecture, was that it would, if you severed a major nerve bundle, that, it would route around it. And this is one of the failures of the commercial internet provisioners, is that they have tended to start creating the physical structure of the internet in a way that much more resembles the telephone system. I mean, in fact, AT&T had a line cut, I don't know, 2 years ago down in Silicon Valley. Somebody with a backhoe.
Yeah, I remember that.
Had some fiber and put San Francisco out of cyberspace. Now, that's just stupid.
That's bad.
Yeah.
Like you say, it's exactly the way the internet's not supposed to work.
Exactly. So there are things that can and ought to be done. I mean, and then, as I say, there's some questions whether we have government in this country that's functional enough to do any of them, even if we thought that it was a good idea from a political standpoint.
What do you see as challenges going forward? I mean, we all know about net neutrality and these things. Are there some things that the EFF or you personally are concerned about?
Well, I think they go on being the latest version of the same challenge. I mean, and these were all challenges that Mitch and I knew were going to be the challenges throughout our lifetimes. I mean, there was a reason that we didn't call it the Electronic Freedom Foundation, even though many other people do and have. I mean, this is a frontier area, and will always be within any predictable range that I could state, because the technology completely reshapes the landscape constantly. But the challenge is still, the fact that there are a lot of people who define freedom as the ability of their point of view to get out there. And when in fact, freedom is the ability of the other guy's terrible, odious, disgusting point of view to get out there.
ACLU made the argument today that the big problem on the internet is free speech, whether the laws are going to be a lack of free speech.
Oh, crap.
And what you're describing is how we decide whether something is free speech or not, right? Which is, free speech is not just freedom of my speech; it's freedom for the people you hate.
It's freedom. I mean, John Stuart Mill said it better than I just did. I mean, he said that liberty resides in the rights of that person whose views you hold most odious.
Yes,
and that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's placed me in the really uncomfortable position of having to defend some truly odious views. I mean, I look at these people that are protesting at servicemen's funerals, and I basically want to have them all horsewhipped. But unfortunately, I feel like they have a constitutional right to do that terrible thing.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way about my vision of the internet hasn't changed in 20 years or 25, and that is that eventually it is an environment where anybody who has something to say will be able to say it, and anybody who wants to listen will be able to listen. And, people can sort it out from there.
Yeah. A lot of times, you lift rocks and whatever foul things are under there, the light of day can sanitize.
Well, human nature, but I also think that we're not quite as ugly as we imagine ourselves to be.
And you're a utopian after all.
Well, I kind of. I like to think of myself as a realistic idealist.
A realistic
as I get older,
I like that, yeah.
As I get older, I get more realistic all the time because I see the same basic errors being committed. Just life among the humans. And I did expect this. I mean, I noted years ago that when my mother, who died in 2000 at 94, had lived in Wyoming all her life, and she had lived in a set of conditions where she started out where the fastest way to get information from A to B was a galloping horse, and ended up writing me email all the time. Mm-hmm. And saw all these profound transformations in information technology. And yet when she told stories, the technology was invisible because it was about the conversation and not the phone. Mm-hmm. And that goes on being true.
Do you include Julian Assange and WikiLeaks as one of the groups you would defend?
Well, no. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of WikiLeaks.
Yep.
And I, actually have been somewhat inadvertently helpful in giving them a more stable platform, because I gave a speech in Iceland a couple of years ago in which I declared that I thought Iceland would be an ideal place to kind of have the Switzerland of bits. Uh-huh. Relatively unassailable location, right, with a very, freedom-loving constituency. And they took my suggestion seriously and went out and passed they call it information, I can't remember, IMMI, I think it is.
What is it about WikiLeaks that is important, that it needs to exist?
Well, it needs to exist so that I think it's really important for institutions to be as visible as individual humans are becoming. I mean, I don't think privacy has a promising future for people. But I'll be much more comfortable with being naked myself if the institutions that might impose themselves on me are equally transparent.
There you go.
You got to, you got to have a concomitant reduction in secrecy to match the one in privacy.
That's what Jeff Jarvis has always been preaching, is transparency for all.
No secrecy gap.
That's
Yep.
right.
Yep. The EFF does such great work. I'm proud to be a sustaining member of the EFF and invite anybody who wants to know more to visit EFF.org, and especially EFF.org/action. That's the Action Center. These are the things that are currently on the EFF's radar that you can do something about, that you might want to act upon. And there are some really active.
It's a really kind of extraordinarily long list. I mean, really, we have a staff that is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
These guys go at everything like they're killing snakes, and there are real threats to the open internet that get dealt with invisibly every day at EFF. And nobody ever knows about it, and we can't even really take credit for it because what we've just done is too complicated for most people to know.
Right.
I mean, it's hard to explain.
Amicus briefs and lawsuits
filings and standard setting bodies and job owning with various institutions that seem to think that they want to do something that we think is going to be a problem, or identifying problems that it would take somebody as nerdy as we are to figure out. I mean, like our really wonderful one of our wonderful nerds, Seth Schoen, it occurred to him one day that there might be something in inkjet printers.
Oh man, that's an incredible story.
The
yellow dots.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that yes, in fact, thanks to anti-counterfeing measures by the Secret Service, that every printer that has been made so far in this country or sold in this country has a unique signature contained in steganographically in its printout. So, they were trying to keep people from counterfeiting money, but this is also a pretty good way to find out where stuff that you don't want have widely distributed in paper can come from.
The Pioneer Awards are coming up too, November 8th. Corey's going to be hosting those. I'd love to broadcast those. I wonder, I'll have to contact.
I think we would be delighted.
That would be awesome.
Sure. Definitely. I think that would be swell. I'll be there myself.
It sounds great. Honoring some really important pioneers.
As we do every year, and oftentimes they're extremely obscure pioneers that most people haven't heard of, but they've gone out and they've done amazing things. I mean, brave things.
Yep.
I mean, one of these guys, I'm never very good at remembering names in foreign languages, but we've got one fellow that we gave an award to this year who has been tortured and jailed for taking the initiative to prove that the Indian electronic voting machines were easily cracked.
Hare Krishna Prasad Vernuru.
Right.
Wow. John, thank you so much for your time. You're just, you're always an inspiration, always great to talk to, and a deep thinker, which is awfully exciting.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's nice to have the opportunity. Feel free to call me again any old time.
We shall. John Perry Barlow, projects.eff.org/Barlow. And EFF.org is an important address to keep to hand. Thank you, John.
All right. See ya.
Take care.
Thanks, John.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us for our conversation with John Perry Barlow. Thank you, Tom, for being here, too. I know it's a long day for you because you just finished TNT. But
I wouldn't miss it. Getting a chance to talk to him was fantastic.
Well, and that's what's going to be fun. This is something that we just kind of informally have started. Somebody said, is this a podcast? It's not a podcast.
It's something.
It's something. I never liked the word podcast. It's a show. We're going to try to do this every Wednesday afternoon right after TNT, roughly 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. That's 2300 UTC. So just before you go to bed, if you're outside if you're on the international date line, I don't know, if you're somewhere out there on the GMT line. We did WAS last week. John Perry Barlow this week. You can see these online at twit.tv/specials. It is not technically a podcast because we don't currently have an RSS feed. I think we could think about that.
Yeah, well, we got a couple under our belt. It takes 2 or 3, right?
Yeah, and I also felt like I didn't want to put the pressure of having it be a show on it. We've got some great names, and we'd love to hear more names if you want to email Eileen.
It's not a show. It's just a feed.
It's just a feed. It's just something we do.
Yeah.
And we will continue doing that whenever we can every Wednesday. We've got some. Do we have somebody, Eileen, lined up? Not next. We will by Wednesday. I have some ideas. And Michael Geist is going to join us in a couple of weeks.
Excellent, yeah.
He is the Canadian, he's kind of the Canadian Larry Lessig is the best way to describe it. He's a law professor, I think in Ottawa, and his blog is really a great place to find out about a lot of things. He's the guy who made ACTA public.
Yeah. Anything you want to know about the American, it should be called American, the Anti-Counterfeiting Treaty Association, something like that. Anyway, it's an anti-counterfeiting treaty.
Yeah,
he's the guy. He's the one who discovered it, publicized it. Well, he didn't discover it, but he made it public, and got people interested in it. And really, anytime there's a big copyright snafu, Michael has something worth listening to say about it.
Yeah, yeah. Be a great guest. That's coming up in a couple of weeks. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget Tom Merritt, TNT, every Monday through Friday covers the tech news. We start kind of the show begins a little ways in, but we start the broadcast as soon as Leo's done at 2:30 Pacific, 5:30 Eastern.
You'll never be late if you show up at 2:30
at live. Yeah, we can pretty much guarantee that. Live.twit.tv. Thanks to you all for joining us. We'll see you next time.